Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Richard Zaltzman for our next in the series of Quickfire chats in the launch of the Sustainable Foods Conference, which is being held next January, the 28th and 29th at the Business Design Centre. First of all, thank you, Richard, for joining us, taking time out of your busy day and a particularly hot day here in the UK to chat to me of all things about food sustainability.
Thank
Just
you,
as a
Guy.
broader, warmer question, thank you. Just tell us briefly, Richard, about yourself and your position, your background. How did you become, CEO at EIT Food and running up to your work now?
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here at EIT Food. We're an astonishing organisation with a mandate to bring innovation to some of the biggest challenges in the food sector. I've been really focused on sustainability for the last 6 or 7 years, but actually off a background in the technology sector. So I spent 10 years at Microsoft. I set up a consulting firm, worked as a consultant, and I think that's as we face really big challenges in any sector, but food particularly acutely. I feel the lessons that you learn from technology and how quickly you can change things and the impact you can have been incredibly valuable to me in my career. I became CEO only 6 or 7 months ago in January this year, and we're really on a journey of change in EIT Food um, to tackle the big challenges and also to really focus on impact in the long term, which is great. It's the direction we and our partners are really pleased to be in.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are doing great work, and I'm sure we'll be touching upon that briefly in a moment or so, particularly around the technology angle. But I'd
Yeah.
love to hear, Rich, in terms of for those who are not as familiar with EIT Food, if you give a brief overview about its work, its concept, the mandate, and where its origins have stemmed from.
Yeah, but we're the largest food innovation community in Europe. We were set up as a body under the European Union to bring innovation specifically to food, and we're one of 9 so-called knowledge and innovation communities, each of which is focused on a particular challenge area. So we've got food, we've got energy, digital, climate, urban mobility, etc. So we're here really to focus on European food system innovation, and specifically, we've chosen to focus in 3 areas. Healthy lives through food. So really, how do we improve people's diets and health outcomes? A net zero food system. So net zero being much, much more than carbon, really a sustainable food system in all of its dimensions, and also improving resilience and reducing risk in the food system. So that's what we're here to do, very much through innovation. So right from startups and creative innovation through to university research and increasingly into implementation of that innovation with the companies and the people who work throughout the food sector, from our farmers who every single day face these challenges in their fields and in their markets, all the way through to the consumers who take food off the shelves in a retailer and wonder where it's come from or how good it is for them.
No, I mean it's spot on, particularly in terms of the current challenges we're facing within food systems. EIT's mandate is actually in line with a number of, you see, big multinational corporations. They will have similar goals in terms of tackling their sustainability challenges. But I'd love to know, on that note, I mean, from your perspective and in a European perspective, what are the challenges that Europe particularly faces when it comes to food systems? We could look at globally or broader externally afterwards, but from a European focus, what are the challenges and what areas, what countries particularly are EIT Food really, looking at?
Yeah, and I think one of the ones that's very pressing right now is probably um, food systems resilience. Now, this might not be top of everybody's mind. You've got issues like ultra processed food, we've got issues around protein, but actually, when we look at the long term, food systems resilience is a really, really key topic for Europe as a whole. If you read the European Climate Risk Assessment, which was published in March this year, food is one of 6 critical risk areas highlighted, and it's actually deeply ingrained with others around water, health, and ecosystems. So, of the 6 risks in this report, food and its alignment to health, water, and ecosystems really forms the kernel of this. So, Europe, and of course, it is a global issue as well, really has to look at quite starkly the food system risk, and we're seeing that right now. If you look at Greece
Oh, yeah.
and southern Europe, Greece wildfires right now. You look at the food production in southern Europe in the heat waves we've had over the last few summers. Not only has it caused an incredible amount of excess death when you look at it, so on a personal level, it's an extremely traumatic event. It's also deeply affecting the ability of Europe to produce food in some of its breadbasket regions. And you think of, maybe we think of these things as far away, that food system risk is not here, because our markets have proved to be incredibly elastic after COVID. They seem to absorb the shock of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on production of grain and sunflower, etc. But actually, you start to add up those factors, and resilience becomes an increasingly important topic for Europe to address. What can you do about it? Well, we're really looking at innovation at all sorts of levels. Innovation to improve the resilience of crops in the ground so that they are more drought or flood risk resilient. Innovation in supply chains to shorten supply chains, to reduce dependency on global markets, etc. And of course, innovation at the consumer end so that people are more comfortable buying foods that maybe they don't recognize, but are actually easier to grow, easier to produce in a climate stressed environment, such as we're starting to see very much in Europe at the moment. So I'd probably put resilience as the one that is probably not as deeply in the spotlight as it should be. And it's interesting when we talk to companies and we're engaging corporates around topics like the protein agenda, like regen ag. Actually, when you dig deep, the benefit to companies is on improving resilience through their value chain. Yes, all the big food companies want to start sourcing food that they can label as regenerative. But why do you want regenerative food? Well, ultimately, regeneratively sourced food comes from much more sustainable landscapes, and it is a significant reduction of the overall system's risk if you can get a landscape to produce food regeneratively. So it's almost a hidden topic, strangely a hidden topic, and I'd love to see it much higher up the agenda.
I hope you don't mind if I ask you a follow up to the resilience and regenerative areas you just posed. Has it been challenging, encouraging, and positioning farming within Europe and the regenerative aspect? Because ultimately, as I'm sure you're aware, in the UK, the conversation around cost and who's paying for it, and the farmers are already squeezed, and they are the lifeblood of the food system.
Yeah.
So, are you having some difficulties in that regard?
Look, yes, definitely. I'm not going to shy away from this. Farmers are an incredible community. It's fascinating at the events from Davos, which was my very first day as in my new role.
Oh
Was in
wow,
Davos, first ever
fire
Davos.
pit.
Let's not go there, but it's a very strange
Yeah.
environment. Everyone wants to talk to a farmer, through to the kind of conferences we run, through to the corporates themselves. Everybody wants this input from farmers, but strangely, their voice is still very, very poorly heard, I think, in some of these discussions. At the same time, where is the risk to a farmer? Well, at the moment, they carry nearly all of the risk of any significant change before the farm gate. Very, very little of the risk if a farmer chooses to move to, say, regenerative practice, chooses to reduce the dependence on their inputs of nitrogen, etc. That risk is held by that brave, pioneering farmer. And so what we're looking at really is ways for the value chain. So all of the people who engage from the point that the farmer produces the food, or indeed even before when they start planning, all the way through to the supermarket shelf or the market in which that food ends up in. How can you share that risk and co-invest alongside the farmer? So it's no longer just they lose or they win and everybody else wins. It's everybody hopefully wins together. And companies are increasingly understanding that the only way to do this is collaboration. And we're really delighted with our regenerative innovation portfolio, which has brought big names together to work very collaboratively in effectively just lifting the landscape up. So no one wins individually if you create a regenerative, if you try to produce a regenerative carrot, for example. If company X comes along and says, I want a regenerative carrot, it's impossible to do. There's no such thing. There's a regenerative landscape from which every organization that sources food from that landscape, or every person, could benefit, but you've got to invest in the landscape collectively. And we're starting to see that recognition surface. It's difficult for companies. They're not used to true collaboration. But again, we're an innovation agency, so we're also looking to invest in business model transformation, which probably when we were founded 8 years ago, that wasn't really on the agenda. It was much more technical innovation. But actually, to tackle challenges like this, we've got to see radical business model innovation so that companies that compete head to head on the shelves are collaborating deeply in the fields. And that's a real change in mindset that we're very positive can come about.
Absolutely. I mean, business model transformation, is no easy feat.
No.
We won't go into that, but you're absolutely right. Collaboration has been the theme, I would say, particularly at our events for a number of years, and we are starting to see, the bigger groups, bigger conglomerates, really nailing down on that and trying to see what they can do together to help support, obviously, a sustainable and resilient, as you say, food system, which is absolutely crucial. And we've got time for maybe one or two more points, Richard, if you don't mind. I'd just like to ask you in terms of the financing aspect of EIT Food. I mean,
Yeah.
they're obviously the situation is tricky, and when in regards to changing food systems, which is ingrained in us, but it's exciting because there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of new technology, new ideas out there. What do you look for when you're looking at at a potential investment, or looking at a new model, whatever that is?
Yeah. So first of all, we're a granting agency. So we bid for and we win a grant every year from our parent funder, the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. So we then look for areas of innovation to deploy that grant. Now, historically, that's been just to push money out the door. And what we realized is actually, whilst that's really important for research, for universities, and to a certain extent to support startups, the kind of no conditions money or limited conditions, companies don't actually want the money typically. What they want is us to pull together a group of other organizations who share the same goals. So what we're seeing is a very positive transition towards co-financing, de-risking, if you like. We put some money on the table, but then the companies are coming to us around the table with each other with the kind of finance you need to really get momentum and start to build scale. So if I look at, say, regenerative innovation at the moment, we're putting around 15 million on the table over 3 years, and companies are funding exactly the same amount or even more from their own pockets because they're getting a hell of a lot more benefit from getting around the table than they are from maybe a grant of a few €100,000 to test something themselves. And I think that co-finance model is one which really supports that collaborative effort that is needed. Is this kind of money what is needed to drive a regenerative transition across Europe? Absolutely not. And I think this is something we're also exploring. We're really looking as part of this for viable business models for farmers. So some areas of regenerative agriculture absolutely need deep investment. You need capital equipment if you're going to change the way you sow seed, for example, into no-till equipment. Those are hundreds of thousands of euros per machine. Moving to biologicals, if you can get hold of them, is not a cheap process. However, and I think a lot of the argument has been skewed so far on the cost. The default assumption is it costs a lot more. Someone's got to pay. Actually, there are areas where it costs more, but there are also areas, and there are also pioneer farmers who are saying, actually, I'm saving money straight away. I'm more profitable in my first few years of doing this than I was intensively farming when you take a basket of indicators. So what we also want to do is try and change the conversation, really look at those areas where we can support a transition that actually is self-sustaining simply because it is more financially advantageous to do it from the outset, and then really focus on the trickier areas where we do need an investment of capital. And we can work with the market, we can work with finance to try and bring that capital in. And again, we're challenging the finance sector. One of the areas we've seen, I'm quite happy to say this online, virtually no innovation is finance. So
Yeah.
if you look at finance in the agricultural sector, you've got bilateral loans between banks and farmers collateralized against their equipment or their houses, right? It's very, very old school. This is 18th century mortgages. Where is the real innovation in insurance products which take into account the whole value chain? Where is the innovation in communities of farmers coming together and leasing equipment in return for yield, backed off to a multi-year offtake agreement, a multi-party, multi-year offtake agreement that allows the whole value chain to make a commitment to a whole group of farmers to say, in this landscape, we will source what you can produce regeneratively for 15 years to give you surety of commitment. We're just not seeing that yet. I will say we're seeing some interest in discussing it, which is really positive. But it's that sort of innovation in finance that I think will unlock the capital that is ultimately needed for this transition.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I would love to talk to you about that because that's my background on another chat one day.
Definitely.
Lastly, if we can, it's a bit of a don't know how we can slim down this question, but the 2024 has been the year of elections.
Yeah.
Curious just to know from your perspective, has that affected EIT's mandate or process moving forward, and also the conversation around food sustainability?
Yeah, look, undoubtedly, politics is taking a change in direction, I would say, in Europe. Clearly, we're seeing an increased interest in right-wing politics, an increased interest in renationalization, in national agendas, certainly a backlash against some things that were perceived as environmental measures. So politically, there is a change coming. It's interesting in the UK, we've gone in the other direction. I think we've gone to a left-wing government. Who knows what's going to happen in America? I think some of the results of those elections show that the right has a very loud voice, but ultimately we tend to trend back a little bit more to center in Europe. How does this affect our mandate? Honestly, I mean, the EIT is within the whole engine of the European Union, and there's a huge wheel of negotiations going on, way too complex for me. Yes, there is a very well structured and much needed review of the whole Horizon Europe program, and within the Horizon Europe program, which is this massive multi-billion scientific investment that Europe makes. Of course, they're looking for value for money. Where should we invest and continue to do that? And the EIT, our parent funder, and we, one of the knowledge and innovation communities, we're all under scrutiny. And that is a very good thing to really say, how do we make the most of Europe's innovation agenda? For us as EIT Food, we really want to make sure we stand on our own 2 feet and say, we absolutely make innovation happen, and we start to draw in the money from both the European Union, but also the companies that benefit from it, the philanthropic organizations that benefit from that partnership, and possibly more on a global stage as well. So whilst politics is changing, for us at EIT Food, it's a necessary point of inflection and reflection. How does this affect the food system agenda? Personally, I would like to see a stronger political commitment to sustainable agriculture and sustainable food, and that's one of the areas that's not happening. You look at farming, from the issues around banning neonicotinoid pesticides through to the use of fertilizer and or lack of use of fertilizer and regenerative practice. It's proving difficult to push that agenda forward politically, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And we see amazingly brave pioneer farmers taking steps, and we're increasingly seeing companies providing really strong support for farmers to take those steps. So whilst policy is a really important umbrella, and it is also a very, very strong catalyst for change, without policy, that doesn't mean you can't have change. And another area, for example, the nature restoration law, that had to be quite significantly diluted in order to be passed. The dilution of member state support for EU-wide legislation, for me, is disappointing. I understand it, but it's disappointing. But that doesn't mean no nature restoration. The farmers are stewards of their land. If you let farmers do their job, no farmer wants to farm a desert. You talk to farmers as if they just want to keep. If you approach the farming community as if they want to just keep hammering the land and squeeze it for every last drop of blood, you've completely misunderstood them. And they are deeply passionate, committed stewards of the land. The nature restoration law would help. It would get money into the right place. But even with weak set of regulation or regulation that's pushed out to the future, that doesn't mean we won't improve nature restoration if we can align our farmers all the way through the various companies and individuals and NGOs and all sorts of support organizations to really focus on this. So I'm always optimistic about the ability for change. We could have a more supportive political environment, of course, but whilst it is a year of elections, it is a year of change. I think the food system momentum is definitely going in the right place.
Yeah, I agree, and we have cause for optimism. Things are moving in the right direction, so there's plenty to be optimistic. Looking forward to. I've taken too much out of your time, Richard. So I really, again, would really like to thank you for spending this hot morning, discussing all things food sustainability and EIT food. So thank you again, and yeah, hopefully look forward to seeing you again in January.
Absolutely delighted, Joe. I'd see you in January.
Thank you, Richard.